Hello, everyone. My name is Sadie McGuire, and I'm an occupational therapy doctorate capstone student here at Children's Hospital, New Orleans, North Shore. And today we're going to be talking about the development of visual motor skills and kind of as a subset of that visual perception skills. These are things that are really often worked on with kids, particularly kind of semi older kids, school age in particular in OT, but they are a set of skills that are kind of hard to describe and understand. Um, and so sometimes it can be difficult to know how to help your child with these skills at home. So hopefully this video is a little informative in that regard and helps you understand a little bit more about what your child might be working on in OT, how you can help them at home, and what struggles they might be having specifically. Before we get into it, I do want to remind you to please take the survey at the end of this video. If you prefer a paper copy, you can get one at our clinic. And this is just super, super helpful for me to understand how this is impacting you guys. It's part of my capstone project, and I really appreciate you guys turning that back in so that I can see y'all's opinions on if this is helpful for you guys, if it's good information, if it's not helpful, if you need more, anything like that. That's why I need those surveys. So I won't say any more about that until the end of the video, and we will get started. So visual motor skills, just to kind of do a little overview of what they are as a definition, is taking in visual information, looking around you, seeing how things are behaving around you, how your environment is, how it's changing, how it's staying the same, and processing that information so that you can produce a motor response or produce a movement. Um, this might look like being able to see that there's a set of steps or an obstacle course in front of you and judge how far away you are from that. So when do you need to pick up your feet to go over it or crawl around it or bend down and duck under it, things like that. This also plays a big role in hand-eye coordination, as well as how we move our hands and our bodies to complete our tasks in play. It's really super important in a lot of things that we do. Hand-eye coordination, especially with catching a ball, knowing when to reach up and grab the ball. And these capitalized words down here are the things that visual motor skill deficits appear in often with kids, particularly with visual motor issues or challenges. A big thing is handwriting. A child who has difficulties with visual motor or visual perceptual skills, once they get to school and start being expected to do handwriting, which is a task that uses a ton of visual motor elements, and we'll kind of get into that a little more in a minute. Um, any problems or struggles that they have with visual motor will really be apparent when they start to try to learn how to write and form letters. Also, keyboarding, a little bit simpler than handwriting, but still that hand-eye coordination, understanding what letters are, the memory to look at a board, see that it says, type your name or whatever word you're trying to type, and then look down at your keys and find those individual letters that you just looked up and saw. Um, that can be kind of difficult if you have a breakdown in the continuum of visual motor skills. Throwing and catching a ball, like we just talked about, and cutting, especially following a line, a curving line, a maze, things like that. Things can be kind of tricky if you're having issues in any of those skill sets. So, visual motor skills are part of essentially every movement that we make. Adults, children, it doesn't matter. But if your child has a visual motor impairment, then these are some of the activities that might particularly be difficult for them. And the tricky part is that a lot of times we can't even really see that they're having trouble with these pieces because they're so inherent in how we move and behave and do. Um, and it might take a lot of problem solving to kind of figure out why the resulting performance is struggling. It might look like a gross motor delay or a fine motor delay. And it might be a gross motor delay or a fine motor delay, but the cause of the problem might be a visual perceptual deficit, and the delay won't resolve until we address the visual perceptual skills. Um, Especially if you have a really young child, and fine motor skills and really coordinated movements aren't typically expected for that age. So if they're having difficulty with those things, it won't really show up until they get a little bit older and are kind of falling behind. And that's where they might get labeled with a fine motor deficit when it really might potentially be a visual motor or visual perceptual problem. So some of these skills are copying letters, patterns, and shapes, kind of like we talked about on the previous slide, where the shape of a letter might be symmetrical. It might not. Looking at a letter next to your paper and seeing the capital A and then going to your paper and being able to perceive that A and then move your hand to copy a shape that looks just like that. That can be really difficult. Recognizing shapes, figures, and forms. Um, and this is another reason why handwriting is so hard because, in their essence, letters are complicated shapes. They have many lines. They're not very regular shaped. They might look different depending on whose handwriting wrote it, what font the paper is in, things like that. Coordinating eye movements to take in information. We're going to talk about the specific eye skills that are part of visual motor. Eye hand coordination for manipulation if you're working with fine objects, tiny little beads, things like that. The eye hand coordination can be really difficult if you have a difficulty perceiving the elements of that task. Also, effectiveness when taking in visual info. If something you have to look around and see what's going on in the classroom, what's going in the world around you, and if it takes you a little bit longer to effectively absorb that information, your reaction time is going to be slower, your processing time is going to be slower, and you're not going to be as successful in the resulting skills that come after that. So I kind of like this quote because if a child sees distorted, he reproduces distorted, and he therefore learns distorted. If you haven't already watched the sensory processing and fine motor videos, we talk a lot about this in those videos about how the way that we take in information from the world is what builds out our experiences and our understanding of the world. Um, it How we take in information creates how we respond to the world. Um, so it makes sense where if you have a visual motor impairment and you have difficulty with visual closure, for example, and we'll go over what visual closure is in a minute, then it's really no wonder if you're having trouble writing your alphabet because the way that you're taking in that alphabet is a little bit flawed. Um, so we really want to nip these impairments in the bud and improve on what we can and give compensatory strategies and adaptations and accommodations for what we can't so that your child is able to take in information as best as he or she is able to and learn most effectively because that's what's really important in a growing child is learning and growing and gaining new skills and getting ready to go be an adult in the world. So if you've been around for a while and watched any of the other videos, you know that I feel like I say this in every module. There's skills within skills within skills. So these are a part of visual motor skills, which are a part of visual perceptual skills. And these seven or so skills right here are particularly the movements of the eye. Taking in visual information isn't just a matter of simply looking at something and being like, oh, I've taken it in. The act of actually looking and being able to control your eye movements in different ways, control the reflexes in your eyes to take in all this different information involves a lot of eye movement related skills. And a breakdown in one of these skills is what could cause a visual perceptual or visual motor issue down the line. So I'm going to just go over these really quickly because they're kind of just definitions, but I did want you to be aware of them because they're the building blocks, excuse me, of players in the big overarching puzzle of visual motor because your eye skills are the main part of the visual system, and the visual system works with all the other systems in our body to help us perceive information and to create an adaptive response to what we see. So acuity is just essentially, do you need glasses or do you not? Can you see far away? Can you see close? How sharply can you see? Is it blurry or not? This is what most people think of when you think of vision. Fixation is being able to maintain your gaze on a single location. So if I'm standing in front of you and you're looking at me and you're able to keep your eye focused on me and take me in without having your eye jump all around the room, would be an example of that. Visual pursuits, which is tracking, is similar but yet different than saccadic movements, which is scanning. Visual pursuits are if you're sitting still and I'm running across the room, you can follow me with your eyes, and your eyes move smoothly from left to right or right to left without moving your head. Whereas scanning is when you're moving your eyes along stationary figures, um, from point to point, like when you're reading, your eyes jumping from word to word to word to word. And it's a little more, your eyes move in a different rhythm, I guess you could say. It's a little choppier and jumpier because it's not smoothly following something that's moving, it's jumping from point to point. And this is how a skill that's important in reading, particularly. Accommodation is if you're looking at me and I'm standing really close right in your face and you can see all of the details of me, all my pores, all the hairs on my eyebrows or whatever, and then I back up. If you kept your view where I was standing, I would be blurry as I backed up. But if your eyes are able to accommodate, which hopefully they are, as I backed up, I would stay in your focus. As I got nearer, your eyes would accommodate to my distance and I'd stay sharp in your field of vision. And then if I backed up, you'd be able to accommodate and I would still stay focused. Um, it's kind of like if you're reading a book and watching TV at the same time, you look down at your book and it's sharp and you can read it, hopefully. And then you look up at the TV, which is much, much farther away, and you can maybe take a blink or two to refocus and you can see the TV very clearly. Stereopsis is using both eyes to create a 3D picture. It's really important for depth perception, which is important for being able to move around through space and not bump into things and trip over things. If someone only has one eye that works or only has one eye period, or you cover up one eye, your depth perception is greatly reduced. And convergence and divergence is if you, it's kind of the kids example, but this is a really good example of convergence and divergence. If you have your finger out in front of you, maybe about a foot or two in front of your face, and you slowly bring it in towards your nose, your eyes kind of converge and go cross-eyed a little bit to keep that in focus. So, like I said, these are just some definitions because I wanted you to understand that these are the building blocks of the visual motor system. And if something's wrong with one of these, there might be something wrong with visual motor or visual perception as a whole. So visual perception um, is kind of the foundation of visual motor, I guess you could say. Before you can effectively move based on your vision, you have to be able to perceive what you're looking at. So visual perception, we're going to go over exactly the definition of it on the next slide because I wanted to go over these first. But these four things are elements of visual perception. First, we have visual closure, which underneath the visual closure, that's kind of like a test, an example of a test that we might use to see if someone has difficulty with visual closure. In this far left column with the kind of dotted lines, it's looking to see if we obscure some of the line and take away pieces of the line, can you tell which shape that used to be? So, like, for example, on B, can you tell that the one on the far right is the same shape, just a little covered up? I mean, am I getting my right and left? The one that's the first one in the row. So that would be my left. Excuse me. um, being able to see the pieces of an object and fill in the blanks. Um, form constancy is for someone to look at a shape and then be able to take that shape out of context and still remember that that's what that shape is, no matter if you see it here or there or somewhere else. This is really important in handwriting and alphabet and reading and letters, seeing an A and knowing that that's an A no matter where you see it, even if it's not on a flashcard anymore. You see it on the flashcard and then you see it in your book and you know that that's still an A. So, for example, knowing that number 4 is what goes in this little spot, it's just turned upside down. Figure ground is if there's a jumbled mess, being able to pick out something from the background. So if I opened this drawer and I said, go find that green sock, I need the green sock, go get it for me. Someone who had difficulties with figure ground might not be able to find that green sock. They might not be able to pick that out from the jumbled mess of a background. If a child has difficulty with figure ground perception, it might be really hard for them to stay organized or to find things if things aren't organized. If you ask them to go get a specific spoon out of the silverware drawer, they might not be able to find it. And you go over there and you're like, it's right here. Um, that might just be them not looking very hard. But it also could be a figure ground deficit if it's something that happens consistently and organization is a major problem. But like I said earlier, with visual perception and visual motor deficits are really, really hard to figure out at first because there are a lot of other things that could be at play. With the figure ground thing, if someone's really disorganized and has trouble finding things, it could be an executive function deficit. It could be both. These are just things to consider. Visual memory. So if I showed you that sheep at the top and then took the sheep away, you would still be able to pick out the sheep out of these 4 if I showed you these 4 things right after. This is important for holding things in your brain that you've just seen so that you can act upon it, specifically in handwriting. I know we keep coming back to handwriting, but it's really just the poster child for visual motor and visual perception. If you're copying something off the board in school, you have to have visual memory to see that thing on the board and then keep it in your brain for a split second until you can write it down on the paper. And that's not so easy for a lot of kids. So, if you're having visual perception problems, it results in a difficulty understanding what you've seen, remembering what you've seen, and matching what you've seen with what you know. So, an example would be all of those things on the previous slide. You have trouble understanding what it is, remembering what it is, or matching what you see with what you know to be true. Um, Essentially, visual perception is just a difficulty interpreting the information that's all around you and processing what you see. So, if your child has difficulties with visual motor or visual perception, I hope that they're in OT and working on that, and I'm sure that they're working very hard on that. But it doesn't happen overnight. And so, in the meantime, there are a lot of compensatory strategies that you can do to help them, particularly in school. That can be an area where it's really important to maybe see about establishing accommodations if possible, or speaking with their teacher about certain things that might be able to help them be more successful based on the skills that they're having trouble with. These are also, of course, things that you can do in your own home when you're working or playing with your child or putting expectations on them to just keep in mind that certain things might need to be asked or presented in a slightly different way. Um, with the visual memory, like we were talking about before, how copying from the board becomes very difficult if you change it from far point copying, where they have to look all the way across the room at the board and look all the way back down at their paper. If they have a copy of what they're supposed to be writing down that they can keep on their desk so they don't have to look as far and it can be right next to their paper where they're writing, that can make it a little easier. That's called near point copying. Also, be sure to provide rest breaks. Visual processing uses a lot of energy. If someone is struggling with it, it uses even more. And so, if someone's having a really hard time working through some problems or struggling with handwriting and they've been working on their letters and they're just so tired, let them have a rest break. Provide lots of rest breaks. You don't want to fatigue them and create frustration and negative emotions and associations with the work. Be sure to work in rest breaks when you're putting a lot of visual motor expectations on your child. Consider positioning and head support if your child's in a wheelchair, because how they're positioned tells you what they can see of the world. If they are in a tilt and space chair and they're tilted back, they're not going to be able to see as much as you or I. They can only kind of see what's up or immediately in front of them. If they have head supports, they might not be able to turn. And there might not be anything you can do to change that. The position that they're in might just be how it needs to be. But you can consider bringing their world to their visual space, holding things up in front of them where they can see and they don't have to crane their head or bend their eyes down really far to look. That can be exhausting on the eye muscles. Visually, you can present things with contrasting, simple backgrounds. So, not the slides that I use are really not the best for someone who has a visual processing deficit. You want plain, simple, few distractions where there's less to take in and less to process. When possible, I mean, this is sometimes they have to do things in the real world and you're not always gonna be able to control this. But if you're really working on this and you can present familiar items, things that they know what they look like and they've seen before and they're very familiar with them, present things one at a time, and then slow down your presentation of things so that they can process, because it might take them a little longer to be efficient with that processing. Also, consider organization and other executive function strategies. We talked a lot about this in the executive function module. So, this is kind of a little trick, a little gotcha. If you want to know more about those, you're going to have to watch the executive function module. And please fill out the post survey on that after you finish that as well. You can also do things when they do their school worksheets to help provide blanks if they have to. It's a fill or yeah, a fill in the blank question, but there's not a line drawn. It can be really hard for them to understand where to write their answer, or their answer might start to like leak down the side of the page, or their words might be really big or way too small. Provide a line. It's a visual cue to let them know this is where we write our word, this is how we organize it in space, it goes here. Remove distracting info on the page if there's like a lot of extra choices, a lot of extraneous info, pictures on the side that aren't needed. Um, just keep it bare bones. And keep related info close together, like if there's a word bank, put it near the section of the test or the worksheet that requires the use of the worksheet. If things are on the front and back of a paper, maybe try to get it on the same side so they're not separated by having to flip the paper over. We're about to start talking about different interventions for remediation of visual motor skills, but I just wanted to emphasize first that working on all of the specific pieces that we talked about earlier individually might not necessarily translate to functional improvements. You need to pair the activity with a function, or pair the skill with a functional activity so that your child's neural pathways can change. So that is really, it makes it easier on the parent because it means that they're just learning by doing. You're not giving them, oh, they're having trouble with visual motor and catching a ball, and we're going to stand there and do drills and catch a ball 100 times. Work it into play, make it fun, make it functional for your child so that they are building those neural pathways of when I'm in my element and doing my kid thing, this is how we do it. Work on actual writing that's interesting and relevant to your child if possible. I know some kids just don't want to write no matter what happens. Play a game where they have to throw the ball, not just sit there and bounce the ball and do drills back and forth. Different things like that. And you can always talk to your child's OT for ideas on how to make things that are interesting to your specific child more functional. So, that being said, some remediation strategies that are functional activities and not just individual pieces are throwing a ball as part of a game, balloon bat, where you have a blown up balloon and you try to keep it off the ground or bat it back and forth, popping bubbles, giving high fives, all of those incorporate a lot of visual motor, particularly depth perception, motor planning, things like that. You can also engage different sensory systems, which see the sensory processing module if you want to learn more about the different types of sensory systems and how they impact learning and regulation. um, because that makes the activity makes your brain light up a lot more um, when you're completing the activity. So you could do a puzzle while they're on the swing. If they have a swing at home, you could get them on their tummy over the swing and have the puzzle on the floor is a good way to do that. Or they could be swinging while they're tossing beanbags into a hoop. It's really easy to incorporate the vestibular system, which swinging does, with other elements of visual motor. They can play I Spy, and that could doesn't have to necessarily be a seek and find I Spy worksheet. It could be I Spy in the real world as you're going to do your grocery shopping or sitting waiting for little brother to get out of daycare, whatever it may be. You could play I Spy with the things around you. You can do dot to dots, mazes if your kid is having trouble staying in the border of a maze, and even just like understanding that you need to stay in the border of a maze because some kids are like, why, it's a piece of paper. I can color all over the piece of paper. You can use glitter glue or puff paint to trace the walls and kind of give a physical cue of a border of, oh, your pen bumped into this. We don't draw over it. There are lots of printable worksheets. At the end of this video, I have a link to more information and helpful hints and links if you would like to know more about visual motor beyond this PowerPoint. And there's some more ideas of other visual motor activities that you can work on, including some websites that they can play. And there are some printable worksheets that you can access for free on those links. Also, practice letter formation and recognition in real life. So as you go through the store, you could say, what letter is that? A for applesauce. You love this applesauce. It starts with A. So they're starting to recognize things functionally and not just on a flashcard or a piece of paper at school. So here are some fun functional games that they can play that hopefully your child will enjoy, but that work on visual motor skills. So the top crazy picture is a seek and find I Spy game that they could play with a dry erase marker. The shapes on the far left are called tangrams, and they are kind of a complicated visual motor game where you create different shapes out of these shapes. So you'll create, I guess, figures out of the shapes. Um, and your child has to match them. The alphabet flashcards matching uppercase and lowercase can be helpful if the handwriting and letter recognition is the part that their visual motor skills are having difficulties with. And then building something 3D where they have to see how it works together, where if you put it on backwards, the marble will slide right out of the tube. Building a marble run like that is a super fun visual motor activity that incorporates a lot of physical hands-on motor skills while also that perceptual 3D kind of thing. And another thing I want to say with any of these games or things like that, even if your main concern is that your child is having letter reversals, they're not recognizing letters in real life, or their handwriting is just atrocious and you can't even read it. So why am I building marble runs and playing tangrams? These are all working on the skills that your child is struggling with. They're addressing those skills and strengthening those skills so that they are able to recognize letters. It's kind of like if your child is having difficulty with a pencil grasp and they're not able to write because they can't hold a pencil very well and their intrinsic strength is very weak, we might have them use a squirt bottle to water the plants to strengthen that. And that has nothing to do, squirting a bottle outside on the outside looking in doesn't have anything to do with grip strength for holding a pencil and handwriting, but really we're working on the skill that's lacking. And that's what these things do. They work on the visual motor skill that is impairing the function. There also are some apps that you can use to, if you have an iPad or an Android tablet, anything like that. While especially if you've watched the nighttime routine management video, we talk about screen time limitations in that. It's really recommended that a child under 12 doesn't really get more than 1 or 2 hours of screen time a day. Um, if your child is going to be on an iPad, no matter what, and they just will have a fit if they don't have their iPad, these are a really great option to put on the iPad as games instead of Cocomelon or just watching a show, YouTube TV, whatever it is, which is very passive and it's really not helping them to build any skills. Um, these things are beneficial apps that can really help, especially if these are targeted towards visual motor skills. I really love the symmetry exercises for kids. That one's a little more complicated, and a lot of kids might need someone with them to help understand. It gives you a design that's cut in half, and it gives you only half the design on a grid, and you have to draw the other half. I also like the dot to dot. It says low vision. Um, it's really for anyone, not just anyone with low vision, because it's really helpful for drawing your letters correctly. It doesn't let you move on until you've picked up your finger or your pencil at the right spots and formed it in the correct way. And it so that helps to get those neural pathways down of forming it right. So, that being said, your child's OT is always available to tell you anything that you could possibly want to know about the challenges and difficulties specific to your child and give you ideas for things that are really individual for your child based on what they have seen that they enjoy or that they struggle with. Um, and so this is just an overview to give you some ideas. Don't forget to check out the helpful links if you want to know more and get even more ideas. And there's some websites and fun worksheets and things like that on that doc as well. And then please take the post survey. Um, like I said, that's so helpful for me. Um, if you want to print a copy, just ask for one at the clinic. I know the QR code isn't always the easiest to read, but we would also be happy to email you one if you prefer to do it digitally. With that being said, thank you guys for listening. And please go back and watch any other videos that you feel might be helpful and take the survey on those as well. So I hope this was helpful for you guys and see you later, I guess.